Darnell Washington was 42 years old, and to everyone who knew him, he was exactly what he appeared to be: a maintenance supervisor, a modest house, a 7-year-old truck, a man his wife had quietly decided wasn't enough. Tasha had stopped pretending somewhere around year 7. The warmth became performance. The respect became contempt she didn't bother to fully conceal. He told himself it was a season. He was wrong. He came home early one Tuesday evening to find her laptop open on the kitchen table. He reached to close it. The email's subject line stopped him cold. Filing timeline, D. Washington asset disclosure. His wife had retained a divorce attorney. She had built her case. She had submitted a financial picture of their life: the house, the truck, the $47,000 in their joint accounts, and believed she knew exactly what she was walking away from. What Tasha Washington did not know was that her husband was the silent founder and majority owner of a $2 billion logistics company, and that the man she had just filed against was not the man she thought she married. Standing in that kitchen, reading every word, Darnell made a decision, and she had absolutely no idea what was coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Darnell Washington woke before his alarm, as he had every morning for the past 15 years. The bedroom was still dark, the first hint of dawn barely touching the edges of the curtains. Beside him, Tasha slept facing away, her breathing steady and distant. He slipped out of bed without disturbing her and padded downstairs in his socked feet. The coffee maker hummed to life under his familiar touch. While it brewed, he stood at the kitchen window, watching the street slowly emerge from darkness. Their neighborhood was modest: single-story homes with small yards, the kind of place where people worked hard and kept to themselves. The coffee finished brewing. Darnell poured it into his thermos, the same one he'd carried for 7 years. He returned upstairs, kissed Tasha's cheek softly. She stirred but didn't wake, didn't reach for him like she used to. His F-150 started with a low rumble. The truck was approaching 100,000 miles, but he maintained it meticulously. The early morning traffic was light as he drove to the distribution facility where he'd worked since before his marriage. The security guard, Marcus, waved him through the gate. "Morning, Mr. Washington." "Morning, Marcus. Your boy still playing ball?" "State championships next week." Darnell nodded approvingly. "Let me know how it goes." Inside, the facility was already humming with activity. Loading docks filled with trucks, forklifts moving in precise patterns across the concrete floor. Darnell did his morning walkthrough, noting everything that needed attention. A hydraulic leak on Dock 4, slow but steady. The new hire, Tommy, rushing his safety checks. Karen from accounting on a conference call, massaging numbers for corporate like she did every Tuesday. The workers nodded respectfully as he passed. They trusted him because he knew every inch of the building, could diagnose problems by sound alone, and never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. His coveralls were clean but worn, his boots sturdy and practical. At lunch, he sat in his small office and opened the sandwich he'd packed. His phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. "Dinner with the Hendersons tonight?" He typed back, "Can't. Late shift." It wasn't true, but the thought of another evening watching Tasha perform warmth for their neighbors while treating him like furniture was more than he could bear today. The afternoon brought news of a facility-wide shutdown. A major electrical system needed immediate repair, and safety protocols required evacuation. Darnell coordinated with the emergency team, ensured all personnel were accounted for, and found himself heading home 3 hours early. The house was quiet when he arrived. Tasha's Audi wasn't in the driveway, probably still at the gym where she taught spin classes to women who shared her carefully cultivated image of success. The lease payment for that car appeared on their credit card statement every month, along with her salon appointments and designer workout gear. He walked into the kitchen, intending to start dinner. Tasha's laptop sat open on the table, screen still bright. As he reached to close it, protecting her privacy as he always had, a subject line caught his eye. Filing timeline. D. Washington Asset Disclosure. The sender was unfamiliar. Caldwell and Associates, LLP. Darnell stood very still, his hand hovering above the laptop. The house seemed to hold its breath. In 15 years of marriage, he had never invaded Tasha's privacy. He had built his entire life around respecting boundaries, maintaining careful distances, protecting what mattered. But something in him had known this moment was coming, had felt it in the way she stopped reaching for him in the morning, in the dismissive tone that crept into her voice, in the way she looked past him when he spoke. He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. The wood creaked slightly under his weight. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. A car drove past. The world continued its ordinary rhythm, while Darnell Washington, maintenance supervisor, husband of 15 years, owner of a secret empire, opened his wife's email and began to read. The emails stretched back 3 months, each one more deliberate than the last. Darnell scrolled through them slowly, his face unchanged. The most recent message outlined a filing timeline, complete with asset disclosures that made his life seem small and predictable. Their house, valued at $310,000, mortgage balance $190,000, his Ford F-150, her leased Audi, a 401k from the distribution center worth $83,000, joint checking and savings totaling $47,000. The life of a maintenance supervisor laid out in clean spreadsheet columns. Tasha's attorney had already drafted the preliminary paperwork. They planned to serve him at work, a detail that made something quiet and hard settle in Darnell's chest. Not anger, exactly, just certainty. He opened another email thread, this one discussing strategy. Given his income level and asset profile, the attorney wrote, we should be able to secure a favorable settlement without significant resistance. Darnell sat back in the kitchen chair, memory taking him to a night 20 years ago. He was 24, working the night shift at Regional Shipping Services. He'd noticed inefficiencies in their route planning, spent months developing an algorithm that could save millions. He remembered the meeting where he presented it, the managers nodding, taking notes, thanking him for his initiative. 2 weeks later, they implemented his system without credit or compensation. But Darnell had already filed the patent. He'd watched his father spend 30 years at the docks. His brilliance with logistics, making money for everyone except himself. They'll take whatever you let them, his father had told him once, so don't let them. Washington Meridian Logistics launched 4 years later, structured through a blind trust that connected to nothing, managed through Meridian Capital Partners. No public record linked Darnell Washington to any of it. The company grew faster than anyone predicted, his algorithm revolutionizing shipping logistics across 3 continents. When he met Tasha at 32, WML was already worth hundreds of millions. On their 3rd date, she asked what he did for a living. He told her he supervised maintenance at a distribution center, had some investments that provided extra income. Her eyes had slid past the first part, catching only on investments. But she never asked for details. Not during their courtship, not after their wedding, not once in 10 years of marriage. He'd found that telling then. He found it devastating now. Darnell closed the laptop precisely as he'd found it. Upstairs, he showered, the hot water beating against his shoulders as he processed what he'd learned. The marriage he'd been trying to save had been dead longer than he'd admitted. Maybe it had never been alive the way he'd thought. He dressed in fresh clothes and returned to the kitchen just as Tasha's Audi pulled into the driveway. She came through the door carrying grocery bags, her gym clothes exchanged for a fashionable athleisure set that probably cost more than his weekly paycheck was supposed to be. "Hey, baby," she said, brushing a kiss across his cheek. The gesture felt like muscle memory, empty of meaning. "I got stuff for dinner." "I'll cook," he said, taking the bags. He unpacked them while she talked about her day. Difficult clients, gym drama, the usual stream of complaints that filled their evenings. He noticed how she never asked about his day anymore. Hadn't for years. He made chicken stir-fry, moving through their kitchen with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. Tasha sat at the counter, scrolling through her phone. When she laughed at something on the screen, Darnell studied her profile. He saw the performance clearly now, or finally admitted he'd been seeing it all along. They ate dinner together, talking about nothing that mattered. She mentioned the Hendersons wanted to get together soon. He nodded, knowing it would never happen. After dinner, she disappeared upstairs to take a call. Probably with her attorney, he realized now. Alone in the kitchen, Darnell took out his phone. He opened his messages to Miles Okafor, his oldest friend and the architect of WML's legal structure. They hadn't spoken in months, part of maintaining the separation between his worlds. He typed 5 words. "Call me tomorrow. It's time." The process server found Darnell beneath a conveyor belt, wrench in hand, fixing a bearing that had been squealing since morning. Marcus, from receiving, called down to him. "Hey, Washington, someone here to see you." Darnell slid out, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag. The process server stood awkwardly in his pressed khakis and button-down, holding a manila envelope like it might bite him. Around them, the warehouse hummed with activity. Forklifts beeping, boxes sliding, workers calling out locations and numbers. "Mr. Washington?" the server asked, consulting his paperwork. "I have documents for—" Darnell noticed how his co-workers had slowed their movements, pretending not to watch. This was what Tasha's attorney had wanted. Public service. Maximum embarrassment. The maintenance supervisor being served divorce papers in front of his crew. "Thank you," Darnell said quietly, accepting the envelope. His voice carried neither shame nor anger. He tucked the papers under his arm and turned back to Marcus. "That bearing's fixed. Tell Rodriguez he can start that line back up." He walked to his office, really more of a workspace with a desk wedged between filing cabinets and repair manuals. The envelope sat unopened while he finished his shift, documenting maintenance requests and scheduling next week's preventive work. Only after the second shift crew had taken over did he finally open it. The filing was exactly what he'd expected. Tasha's attorney had constructed a careful narrative of a marriage that had irretrievably broken down. The asset disclosures matched what he'd seen in the emails, their modest house, the vehicles, his supposed retirement accounts, everything calculated against the salary of a maintenance supervisor. At 7, Darnell pulled into the parking garage beneath Miles's law office downtown. The building's glass and steel exterior reflected the sunset, turning everything rose gold. Inside, Miles's corner office offered a view of the Charlotte skyline that Darnell could have had years ago if he'd wanted it. Miles stood when Darnell entered, coming around his desk to grip his hand. They'd been roommates at NC State before Miles went to law school, before Darnell built WML. Miles had structured every legal document that protected Darnell's wealth, and he'd been waiting for this meeting. "You were right," Darnell said, handing over the filing. Miles scanned it, his expression darkening. "Service at your workplace. That's deliberately aggressive. That's the point. They want me rattled. Defensive." Darnell settled into one of the leather chairs facing Miles's desk. "How do we respond?" Miles pulled up documents on his computer, turning the screen so Darnell could see. "We've had the framework ready. We can file a response that addresses only the assets she's disclosed. Nothing from the trust structure shows up yet." "Perfect. Let her think she's in control." Darnell leaned forward. "I want—" His phone buzzed. Tasha's name lit up the screen. "Take it," Miles said. "Let's see what play she's running." Darnell answered, his voice neutral. "Hello? I'm sorry you found out that way." Tasha's tone was practiced, gentle in a way that felt calculated. "I just think we've grown apart. It wasn't fair to either of us to keep pretending." "I understand," Darnell said quietly. You do? A note of surprise, quickly covered. I hope we can handle this maturely, like adults. Of course. Whatever you need. After they hung up, Miles shook his head. She really thinks she's got this locked down. She thinks I'm what she married, Darnell said. A good man with a small life, who'll give her whatever she wants to avoid conflict. He stood. Let's keep her thinking that. In his truck, he called Aunt Claudette. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. She did it? His aunt asked without preamble. Had me served at work. That girl. Claudette's voice carried decades of sharp observation. Acting like she's doing you a favor by leaving. Like she's setting you free instead of trying to clean you out. She thinks she's being kind, Darnell said, pulling onto the highway. Letting me down, easy. Kind? Claudette's laugh held no humor. Boy, don't you dare let her walk out of that marriage thinking she won. Darnell watched Charlotte's lights bloom against the darkening sky. Everything he'd built was out there. Distribution centers, logistics hubs, the quiet empire he'd protected for 15 years. He thought about Tasha's voice on the phone, so certain she was in control. She already thinks that, he said. That's exactly where I need her. The downtown conference room where Miles prepared their response felt different at night. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the legal team's images back at them, ghost-like against Charlotte's glittering skyline. Miles had assembled 3 junior associates who'd spent the week preparing the financial disclosure documents. Everything's here, Miles said, sliding a thick binder across the polished table to Darnell. Full corporate structure, all holdings, complete valuation of Washington Meridian Logistics and every subsidiary. Exactly as required by law. Darnell opened the binder, scanning pages of figures that represented 15 years of careful building. $2 billion in assets, laid out in clean black and white. This is what her attorney gets tomorrow? 9 a.m. sharp. Miles leaned back, studying his oldest friend. You ready for this part? Been ready? Darnell closed the binder. Send it. The next morning, Darnell was underneath a packaging line, replacing a worn belt, when his phone buzzed. Text from Miles. Documents delivered. Her attorney's office confirmed receipt. Darnell continued working, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of maintenance tasks. Around him, the facility operated as it always had. Workers calling out locations, forklifts beeping, conveyors humming. He thought about how many facilities like this one made up WML's network, how many workers moved through spaces he owned, never knowing. His phone stayed silent for 2 days. On the third morning, it exploded. First, a call from Tasha's attorney's office. Declined. Then 3 calls from Tasha in rapid succession. Darnell let them go to voicemail while he finished replacing a hydraulic line. When he finally listened to the messages, Tasha's voice progressed from confusion to fury to something approaching hysteria. The final message was just 8 words. Call me back right now. I mean it, Darnell. He waited until his lunch break, then called from his office. She answered on the first ring. What is this? Her voice shook. What are these documents? Standard financial disclosure, he said calmly. Required by law in divorce proceedings. Required by... She made a sound between a laugh and a sob. $2 billion? You're telling me you've been worth $2 billion this whole time? The valuation's actually a bit conservative, Darnell said, unwrapping his sandwich. But yes, that's accurate. How? Her voice rose. How is this possible? You fix conveyor belts for a living. I do fix conveyor belts, he agreed. I also own Washington Meridian Logistics. Have since, before we met. Before we... She stopped. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming softer, almost intimate. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, living in that little house, driving that truck. Why would you hide this from your wife? I'm happy to discuss all of this in mediation, Darnell said, his tone remaining professional. With our attorneys present. Attorneys? Darnell, I'm your wife. We can figure this out together. Just you and mediation, he repeated quietly. Have your attorney contact Miles to schedule. He ended the call and finished his lunch, reviewing maintenance schedules for the afternoon shift. His phone buzzed twice more. He didn't check it. That afternoon, Miles called. Need you to come by the office. There's something you should see. In Miles's conference room an hour later, Darnell studied the documents spread across the table. Bank statements, transfer records, a timeline constructed by Miles's forensic accounting team. They were looking for hidden assets on your side, Miles explained. Standard procedure, but they found something else instead. He tapped one of the papers. 2 years of systematic transfers from your joint accounts to a private account in Tasha's name. Small amounts, carefully timed to avoid triggering alerts. $340,000 total. Darnell picked up one of the statements, noting the dates, the precise amounts. Every transfer under the reporting threshold. 2 years of careful extraction while she smiled across their dinner table. She was building her exit fund, Miles said quietly. Planning this for a long time. Darnell set the paper down. The conference room was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Outside the windows, the sun was setting behind Charlotte's towers, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about Tasha's voice on the phone earlier, that intimate tone when she realized what he was worth. 2 years of stealing from what she thought was all they had. And now she wanted to figure this out together. Add it to the file, he said. Darnell sat across from Sandra Chen in her private investigation office, its walls lined with credentials and surveillance equipment. She was recommended by Miles, former FBI, now running her own firm, known for thorough work that held up in court. Everything in this report was obtained legally, Sandra said, sliding a thick manila folder across her desk. Phone records from the joint account device, credit card statements, hotel receipts, documented public interaction. No gray areas. Darnell opened the folder. The first page was a timeline, meticulously constructed. 3 years of documented meetings between Tasha and Jordan Beaumont, starting with lunch at an uptown bistro in 2019. The pattern evolved quickly. Afternoon meetings at hotels, weekend trips disguised as yoga retreats, text messages that left no room for misinterpretation. The affair itself is clearly established, Sandra continued, but there's something else you need to see. She reached across and flipped to a tabbed section. This is where it gets interesting. Darnell studied the financial documents. Beaumont Development Group's public filings showed a company in crisis. Construction delays, cost overruns, angry investors. $11 million in debt spread across 3 stalled projects. He's been seeking private investment for 18 months, Sandra explained, meeting with every capital group in Charlotte. No takers. The debt structure is toxic. She pulled out a transcript, highlighted sections in yellow. This is from a phone conversation between them 2 months ago. The device was on your joint account, so access was completely legal. Darnell read the highlighted section. Jordan's voice came through clearly in the text. Baby, when this is done, we need your liquidity. I've got 3 properties that just need capital to turn around. With your settlement, we can leverage that into something real, something worthy of us. Tasha's reply, I know. That's why we're doing it this way. Clean and quiet. Jordan, you're sure about the numbers? Tasha, based on standard division of assets? Yes. More than enough to stabilize everything. Darnell set the transcript down. The office was quiet except for the soft whir of a desk fan. Outside, Charlotte traffic moved steadily down Trade Street. There's more, Sandra said. Want to see the rest? Darnell nodded. For the next hour, they moved through the evidence. Credit card receipts showing Jordan's mounting desperation, canceled cards, declined charges, email chains with investors growing increasingly hostile. And through it all, Tasha's constant presence, planning their future with money she thought she was about to extract from her marriage. It wasn't love. It wasn't even primarily an affair. It was a business transaction dressed up in romantic history. Jordan needed capital, and Tasha saw her chance to trade up from the maintenance supervisor she'd settled for. "One last thing," Sandra said, pulling out a final document. "Your wife's gym membership was canceled last week. The reason given was non-payment. Her personal credit cards are starting to max out." Darnell gathered the documents carefully, making sure everything was in order. "Thank you," he said. "This is exactly what we needed." The drive home took longer than usual. Charlotte's evening traffic moved sluggishly, giving him too much time to think. He thought about Jordan's words, "something worthy of us," and wondered if Tasha had felt that way all along, that their life together wasn't worthy of her. He pulled into their driveway as the sun was setting. The house lights were on. Tasha was home. Her leased Audi sat in its usual spot, gleaming under the security light he'd installed last summer. Darnell stayed in his truck, hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the kitchen window, he could see Tasha moving around, probably starting dinner. She'd been cooking more lately, since the disclosure documents landed. Making an effort, playing a role. The realization settled over him like a heavy blanket. He'd spent 10 years wondering if she truly loved him, and now he had his answer. Not only had she never loved him, she'd been actively planning to use him as a stepping stone to what she thought would be a better life. After 15 minutes, he got out of the truck, walked to the front door, went inside. "Hi, honey," Tasha called from the kitchen. "I'm making that chicken you like." Darnell hung his keys on their hook, put his lunchbox in its usual spot, walked into the kitchen. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice carrying that new warmth she'd adopted since learning about his wealth. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw with perfect clarity that she was performing, had always been performing. Even now, knowing what he was worth, she was still performing. He went to the refrigerator, took out ingredients for a salad, and began to chop vegetables, said nothing. Darnell sat in his home office late that evening, the PI's folder spread across his desk. He picked up his phone and called the one person who had always seen through every mask anyone had ever worn. "Aunt Claudette, I need to tell you something. Boy, you know what time it is?" Despite the hour, her voice was sharp and clear. "I have the full picture now." Darnell's voice was steady. "About Tasha. About all of it." There was a rustling sound as Claudette settled into her favorite chair. "Tell me everything." For the next 30 minutes, Darnell laid it out methodically. The affair with Jordan, the systematic theft of $340,000, the coordinated plan to use divorce settlement money to save Jordan's failing business. Claudette listened without interrupting, but he could hear her breathing change as the details accumulated. "That woman," Claudette finally said, "has been playing chess with checkers pieces. She really thought she could outsmart you?" "She thought she was married to a maintenance supervisor." "No." Claudette's voice carried decades of observation. "She thought she was married to someone who wouldn't fight back. That's different." She paused. "Have you talked to Rosalind yet?" "No, but I need to." "You do," Claudette agreed. "That woman has always treated you right. She deserves to hear it from you, not from court documents or gossip." The next morning, Darnell called Rosalind and invited her to lunch at a quiet restaurant in Dilworth, away from their usual social circles. She arrived exactly on time, dressed carefully as always, carrying the dignity of a woman who had raised her daughter alone and done her imperfect best. "Something's wrong," she said, as soon as she sat down. "I can see it in your face." Darnell nodded. "I need to show you some things, Rosalind, because I respect you, and because you should know before it becomes public." He took out copies of the financial records. Not everything, just enough. The systematic transfers, the hotel receipts, the phone transcripts showing the calculated nature of it all. He laid them on the table between their water glasses and waited. Rosalind studied each document carefully, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed. When she finished, she folded her hands carefully on the table and looked at Darnell with eyes that held too much understanding. "I raised her wrong," she said quietly, "and I have known it for years." "You raised her alone," Darnell said. "You did your best." "No." Rosalind's voice was firm. "I taught her to survive, but I didn't teach her how to live. I taught her to secure herself, but not how to love. That's on me." She reached across and patted his hand once, briefly. "You were always too good for her. I knew that too." Meanwhile, across town, Aunt Claudette was making calls. She'd spent decades building relationships through church committees, accounting circles, and community organizations. Now she activated that network with surgical precision. "Sister Jenkins?" "Yes, it's Claudette Washington. I need to ask you about your nephew Marcus, who works at First Capital." Yes." "What do you know about Jordan Beaumont's personal loans?" 3 more calls followed, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. By early afternoon, Claudette had what she needed. Jordan owed significant personal debts to James Monroe and William Carter, 2 pillars of Charlotte's black business community. The loans had been extended based on community trust, which made their violation particularly egregious. Claudette checked her watch, calculated the time, and made one final call. "William, it's Claudette Washington. We need to talk about Jordan Beaumont." "Yes, I know exactly how much he owes you, and I know why he's been ducking your calls." "No, actually, I think it's time to formalize those notes today." The call lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, the machinery of consequence was already in motion. Within hours, Jordan would receive formal demands for repayment from both Monroe and Carter. His last sources of informal credit would evaporate. The community grace that had kept his personal finances afloat would disappear, all while Tasha still believed everything was proceeding according to her plan. 3 days later, Jordan's phone began ringing with calls from creditors. His business credit lines were frozen. Suppliers started demanding payment up front. The careful financial house of cards he'd built began swaying in a wind he never saw coming. Miles Okafor sat in his corner office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk as he methodically reviewed Tasha's amended divorce filing for the 3rd time. Something about the language had bothered him since he first read it. A specificity that felt out of place. He circled another phrase with his red pen, including subsidiary holdings through Meridian Capital Partners. His jaw tightened. That name shouldn't have been there. "Sarah," he called to his assistant, "get me the metadata analysis on these documents." 20 minutes later, Miles stared at his computer screen, his expression hardening. The document properties showed revision history from an IP address belonging to Davidson and Wright, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. Jordan Beaumont's firm. He picked up his phone. "Darnell, we need to talk. Now." Darnell arrived 30 minutes later, still wearing his maintenance uniform. He sat across from Miles, his presence filling the room in that quiet way it always did. "Someone talked," Miles said, sliding the documents across the desk. "Look at page 17. They reference Meridian Capital Partners by name. That's not public information." Darnell read silently, his expression unchanging. "How'd they get it?" "I had our IT team trace the document metadata." Miles leaned forward. "The filing was reviewed by someone at Davidson and Wright before it went to Tasha's attorney. Jordan Beaumont's firm, Jordan's business partner," Darnell said quietly. "Marcus Davidson. You know him?" "Know of him. He did some contract work with one of our subsidiaries last year." Darnell's voice remained level. "Who was his contact there?" Miles pulled up another document. "James Chen, mid-level operations manager at Western Regional. Looks like they stayed in touch. So Jordan's partner pumped Chen for information about the company's structure." Darnell nodded slowly. then fed what he learned to Tasha's attorney. "They were running intelligence on you, Darnell." Miles's voice carried controlled anger, while planning their future together. "This moves beyond divorce into potential legal exposure for both of them. We could file separately on this," Miles continued. "Corporate espionage, breach of confidentiality." "No." Darnell's voice was soft, but final. "We save it for mediation. I want her in the room when this comes out." His phone buzzed. Tasha's name on the screen. The third time she'd called this week. "She's been reaching out more," Darnell said, letting it go to voicemail. Warmer tone. "Asking about my day. Testing to see if I'm manageable. And you're playing along?" "I'm being exactly who she expects me to be." Darnell stood, straightening his uniform. Quiet, accepting, maybe a little sad. Miles studied his oldest friend. "She thinks you're giving up. She thinks I never had anything worth fighting for." Darnell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Let her think that for 2 more weeks. Later that evening, Darnell sat in his truck outside their house. He still thought of it as theirs, though not for much longer. His phone buzzed again. Tasha. This time he answered. "Hey." "Hi," she said, her voice carrying that new softness. "Just wanted to check in. See how your day was." "Same as always," he said, matching her tone. "How was the gym?" "Good. Busy." A pause. "Listen, I know this is hard, but I really think we can handle this like adults. Keep things civil." "I'd like that," he said quietly. "Good." The relief in her voice was audible. "That's really good, Darnell. Maybe we can get coffee next week? Talk about how to move forward?" "Sure," he said. "That would be nice." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. When he hung up, he sat in the darkness of his truck, thinking about the layers of deception. Hers and his. The difference was, she thought she was managing his surrender. She had no idea she was watching him position the pieces. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from Miles. Final mediation date confirmed. 2 weeks from Thursday. Darnell typed back a single word. Good. He got out of his truck and walked toward the house where Tasha was making dinner. She would smile when he came in. She would ask about his day again. She would think his quiet responses meant acceptance. She had never been more wrong about anything in her life. The 43rd floor of Okafor and Associates commanded a stunning view of downtown Charlotte, but Tasha Washington barely noticed as she strode down the marble hallway beside her attorney. Her heels clicked with precise confidence against the floor, a sound she had always loved, the soundtrack of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. She wore a cream-colored Saint John knit suit she'd bought specifically for this day. Her hair swept into an elegant chignon. Every detail had been considered, calculated. She'd even practiced her expressions in the mirror that morning, concerned but composed, dignified in the face of an unfortunate but necessary ending. The conference room door opened. Tasha registered several things in rapid succession. The polished mahogany table, the wall of windows overlooking the city, and Darnell, a version of him she had never seen before. He sat perfectly still in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that fit him with devastating precision. His hands were folded on the table, no papers or files in front of him. Just those hands, steady and patient. The same hands she'd watched fix appliances and change oil for 15 years. But everything else about him was different. His posture, his presence, the way he filled the room without moving. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't smile. He simply watched her with eyes that held nothing she recognized. Miles Okafor sat beside him, impeccable in navy, a single leather portfolio on the table before him. 2 other attorneys Tasha didn't recognize flanked them like sentries. She took her seat across from Darnell, smoothing her skirt with hands she forced not to tremble. Her attorney arranged her files with practiced efficiency. "Thank you all for being here," Miles began, his voice carrying the precise warmth of someone who had already won. "We'll start with standard procedural matters." He walked them through preliminary details, with professional courtesy. Tasha found herself watching Darnell's hands, still folded on the table. The same hands that had held hers at their wedding. The same hands that had built their life. The life she thought they had. Then Miles opened his portfolio and removed a single document. He slid it across the table with 2 fingers. This is the full corporate structure and current market valuation of Washington Meridian Logistics, he said quietly, including all subsidiary holdings and trust arrangements. Tasha's attorney picked up the document first. Tasha watched the other woman's face as she read, watched her expression shift from professional neutrality to something else entirely. After 30 seconds, she passed the document to Tasha. The numbers blurred before her eyes. Billions. The word subsidiaries, phrases like controlling interest and blind trust structure. She forced herself to focus, to actually read, and felt the floor tilt beneath her. She looked up at Darnell. He met her gaze with that same steady patience she had always mistaken for acceptance. "You want to ask me?" he said, his voice soft but carrying easily across the table. "Why, I didn't tell you." The silence stretched. Tasha's throat had closed around whatever response she might have made. "I didn't tell you," he continued, "because I needed to know what you would do if you thought I had nothing." His eyes never left hers. "Now I know." Miles opened his portfolio again. "We'll proceed with the documentation in sequence," he said, his tone purely professional, beginning with the unauthorized transfers totaling $340,000 from joint accounts to Ms. Washington's private account over the past 2 years. He placed another document on the table. Tasha recognized her own bank statements, annotated with precise red circles around each transaction. "Following that," Miles continued, "we have documented evidence of an ongoing extramarital relationship with Jordan Beaumont, including meeting records, communications, and financial interaction." More papers joined the first. Of particular interest is the coordinated financial intelligence operation conducted through Mr. Beaumont's business partner, Marcus Davidson, utilizing unauthorized corporate contacts to obtain confidential information about WML's structure. The documents kept coming, each one precisely labeled and annotated. Text messages, emails, phone records, meeting timestamps, a comprehensive dismantling of every move she'd thought was hidden. "This activity," Miles said, his voice still professionally neutral, culminated in the amended divorce filing containing privileged corporate information obtained through what could be characterized as fraudulent means. Tasha's attorney shifted in her chair. "I'd like to request a brief recess," she said, her voice tight with controlled alarm. "Of course," Miles replied smoothly. "Shall we say 15 minutes?" Tasha sat perfectly still, her spine rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt her carefully constructed world collapsing with the precise, devastating methodology of a controlled demolition. Every assumption, every calculation, every confident step that had led her to this room, all of it crumbling under the weight of what she had never known. And still, Darnell watched her with those quiet eyes that had seen everything all along. The conference room felt smaller when they returned. Tasha's attorney leaned close to her client, whispering something urgent that made Tasha's shoulders stiffen. The woman's normally confident posture had collapsed into something defensive, almost protective. She arranged her papers with hands that weren't quite steady. Miles waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "We're prepared to present terms," he said, his voice carrying that same precise, professional warmth. He removed a document from his portfolio and began to read. "Ms. Washington will retain all personal assets she brought into the marriage," he stated, each word measured and clear. "This includes her jewelry, personal effects, and family heirlooms." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "Additionally, her current vehicle will be purchased outright, with title transferred solely to her name." Tasha's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white against the cream of her suit. She didn't look at Darnell. The proposed settlement figure, Miles continued, has been calculated based on the asset disclosure Ms. Washington's team originally filed. He placed a document on the table. As you can see, this represents a fair division of the marital assets as they were presented in your initial filing. The number on the page was modest by any standard, appropriate for a maintenance supervisor's divorce settlement. It was a fraction of what Tasha had planned for, had counted on, had already mentally spent. However, Miles added, his tone unchanging, we must address the documented dissipation of marital assets. He produced another paper. The $340,000 in unauthorized transfers from joint accounts will be offset directly against the settlement figure. The math was brutal in its simplicity. When the numbers settled, Tasha would walk away with less than she'd brought into the marriage. 10 years, reduced to negative equity. Her attorney reviewed the documents with practiced efficiency, her lips pressed into a thin line. There was nothing to argue. Every figure was documented, every calculation precise. The legal exposure from the fraudulent intelligence gathering alone made any counter-argument impossible. We'll need a moment to review, her attorney said, but her tone carried no fight. Of course, Miles replied. The room fell silent except for the soft rustle of papers. Tasha stared at the settlement figures, her face a mask of controlled devastation. Darnell watched the city through the wall of windows, his expression unchanged. 10 minutes passed before Tasha's attorney straightened the papers and placed them carefully on the table. The terms are... She paused, choosing her words. The terms are acceptable. Miles produced the final documents with fluid efficiency. We've prepared everything for immediate execution, he said. Once signed, the agreement becomes binding. The scratch of pens filled the room. Tasha's signature was sharp, angular, a last assertion of control that changed nothing. Her attorney signed next, then Miles, then the other lawyers as witnesses. We'll file these with the court today, Miles said, gathering the documents. You'll receive certified copies within 3 business days. The meeting ended without ceremony. Darnell stood, buttoned his jacket with practiced ease, and shook hands with both attorneys. His movements were precise, unhurried. He collected his single folder from the table and walked to the door. He didn't look at Tasha. There was nothing left to see. In the hallway, Miles fell into step beside him. They walked in professional silence to the elevator bank. As they waited, Miles's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked at Darnell. Jordan Beaumont's development company just filed Chapter 7, he said quietly. Those debts Claudette helped surface? They were called in this morning. The whole thing's collapsing. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Darnell stepped in, pressed the lobby button with the same steady hands that had sat folded on the conference table. He watched the floor numbers begin their descent. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The elevator continued its smooth downward journey, each illuminated number marking another floor between him and the life he'd built for protection. 43, 42, 41. Each number carrying him closer to whatever came next. The coffee shop hadn't changed. Same faded green awning, same bell above the door that chimed too loudly. Same worn wooden chairs that never sat quite level on the floor. Darnell arrived 15 minutes early, chose a table near the window, and watched steam rise from his untouched coffee. 2 weeks had passed since mediation. Tasha had called 6 times in the last 3 days. He'd let each call go to voicemail, listening to the first one just once, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it, asking to talk. Just talk. He called back because that's who he was, a man who faced things directly. They agreed to meet here, neutral ground, in a neighborhood that had been theirs and now wasn't. The bell chimed. Tasha walked in wearing a simple gray sweater, her usual polish dimmed to something almost apologetic. She ordered nothing, just sat down across from him with hands that didn't seem to know what to do with themselves. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Darnell nodded once, his coffee still untouched. "I've been thinking," she started, then stopped. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the table's surface. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake." The words hung there, waiting for response. Darnell said nothing. "I didn't know who you really were," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "All this time I thought—" She shook her head. "And Jordan, he turned out to be—" She trailed off, the sentence too humiliating to complete. "Not what you expected," Darnell supplied, his voice level. She nodded, a quick jerking motion. "His company's gone. Everything he promised." She pressed her lips together. "I threw away something real for a lie." Darnell studied her face, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. She was thinner, the confident armor stripped away to reveal something raw and uncertain. In another life, it might have moved him. "You knew exactly who I was," he said quietly. "You just didn't think I was worth staying for." The words landed like physical things. Tasha's eyes filled, tears spilling onto cheeks flushed with shame or anger or both. "That's not—" she started. "It is," he cut in, still gentle but immovable. "You knew I was kind. You knew I was steady. You knew I would give you anything you needed. You just decided that wasn't enough." She reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of his hand. "I was wrong. I see that now. We could start over. Really talk this time." "No," Darnell said simply. "We can't." The tears fell faster now. She didn't wipe them away. "Not because of pride," he continued, his voice soft but clear. "Not because I'm angry, though I was, but because I spent 15 years wondering if you loved me, wondering if I was enough, wondering if I should show you more of who I was, or if showing you less was the only way to keep you." He picked up his coffee, still warm. "Now I have my answer, and I won't spend another 15 years wondering anything." "Darnell, please." "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said, and meant it. "I hope you figure out why you couldn't see value unless it came with a price tag. I hope you learn to love someone for who they are, not what they can give you." He stood, straightening his jacket with the same quiet precision he'd always had. "But it won't be with me. That part of my life is done." She was openly crying now, shoulders shaking. He didn't move toward her, didn't offer comfort. Some broken things weren't his to fix anymore. "Take care of yourself, Tasha," he said softly. The bell chimed as he left. He didn't look back. Outside, the morning had warmed. He walked to his car, a new Tesla because he didn't need to hide anymore, and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel. The coffee shop door hadn't opened. She was still inside, probably trying to compose herself. He started the car. The quiet hum of the electric motor felt like the future. Clean, efficient, unburdened. He pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a neighborhood that had served its purpose, a marriage that had taught him what he needed to learn, and a woman who would have to find her own way forward. The road ahead was clear. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't have to calculate what showing himself might cost. He just had to drive. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.